Hi there, I'm Rick Fulbaum from WANF, and this is our political update. Thanks so much for tuning in this week. Usually with me for this podcast is my colleague Tim Darnell. Unfortunately, he was not able to be here today. So we're going to take a look at some of the top political stories of the week, both here in Georgia and across the country. And we want to start with Governor Kemp and some legislation that he signed this week. This is a workforce education bill that was signed into law, which includes a requirement now, and this has to do with school safety, for schools to have a panic button system in place. That is now going to be mandatory for every school district here in the state of Georgia. Political reporter Doug Reardon, who of course also contributes to this podcast, has more on this story from the Capitol. Let's take a look.
Yeah, a legislative session that got started just months after the deadly school shooting at Appalachian High School. Lawmakers said today and said again back then it was that tragedy that made school safety a top priority for them this year. On Monday, Governor Brian Kemp made an extensive package of education bills, laws. Included in the legislation were new measures addressing chronic absenteeism, a shortage of school psychologists, and reading proficiency. But the most comprehensive bill was on school safety.
Ensuring the safety of all those in our schools is and will always be a top priority.
House Bill 268, known as Ricky and Alyssa's Law, now requires schools to provide maps of their buildings to law enforcement for quicker and easier emergency responses. It also makes sharing information on students easier between school districts, and it mandates panic button technology in every Georgia classroom.
Time equals life.
Lori and Ian Al-Hadef are the parents of Alyssa Al-Hadef, one of 17 victims in the 2018 Parkland, Florida school shooting. Georgia is now the 8th state to adopt a version of the law partly named for their daughter.
If Alyssa's law was there in 2018, our daughter would still be alive. And the Appalachian shooting, they used the panic button, and it saved lives.
The Al-Hadef say they pushed Georgia lawmakers to mandate panic buttons after the same tragedy that claimed their daughter's life came to Barrow County.
I would say it's death by 1,000 lashes, because it keeps happening, and these are preventable things. We can prevent this.
The bill is also partly named for Richard Aspinwall, an Appalachian coach who died in the September attack. His father, who was at the bill signing Monday, wants other states to be proactive about school safety.
It happens all over the country. This is the start here in Georgia. The rest of the country needs to follow up on the same thing.
Also included in that package of bills was Senate Bill 1, which would bar transgender women from competing in girls' sports. At the state capitol, Doug Reardon, Atlanta News First.
Well, speaking of Governor Kemp, he is term limited, of course, which means he is not able to run for a third term. And we're beginning to hear from potential candidates who are considering getting into the race, both Democrats and Republicans. And one of those people to recently announce that she was seriously considering a run for the governorship is the former mayor of Atlanta, Keisha Lance Bottoms, who filled out some paperwork this week. This is sort of the administrative work that needs to be done for any political candidate before he or she formally decides to declare a candidacy. She has filed paperwork with the state to establish what's known as a campaign committee, and in a statement she called this an important administrative step in this journey. Last week, State Senator Jason Estevez became the first Democrat to enter the governor's race, so Keisha Lance Bottoms, should she officially enter, would become the second. Republican Attorney General Chris Carr also running, and Atlanta News First, of course, keeping track of who is and who is not running as prominent Republicans and Democrats eye that seat at the governor's mansion. You can read more about the race for the governor's mansion on the Atlanta News First app. Another story that we've been following, which has been very, very important for students around the country, but of course also here in the metro Atlanta area. These are foreign students who have international student visas that allow them to come to this country to study here. And we know that as part of his crackdown on immigration, President Trump has ordered his administration to look into these student visas and to revoke the privileges of a number of students. And we know that so far there have been many students who have had their visas revoked, and now we're learning more about why they were nearly kicked out of college and classrooms and out of the country as well. A court filing reveals what data the Trump administration has been using to make these decisions. Another story that was reported on this week by our political reporter Doug Reardon. Let's take a look.
International students in Georgia are breathing a little easier Wednesday. A judge issued a temporary halt on the cancellation of student visas after the Trump administration revealed they were using a national fingerprint database to identify students they said needed to go.
And that's actually the big problem the judge found here, is you revoked their status without giving them a chance to explain. You just did it.
Charles Kook represents over 24 of Georgia's international scholars at risk of getting kicked out of school and the country just for appearing on that database.
It could be for any reason you were fingerprinted, and if you got a hit, they revoked you, even if you did nothing wrong.
Traffic violations, even check-ins with immigration when they first arrived here to study, all reasons students could have fingerprints in the database. The system flags 6,700 scholars nationwide. Student visas are operated through a system known as SEVIS, or Student and Exchange Visitor Information System. Students aren't applying for immigration, so if their SEVIS visas are revoked,
They can't go to school, they can't work, they can't change status. They basically are undocumented. So the administration has taken legal people and made them undocumented.
the Trump administration stood by its belief this week that it has the power to cancel student visas for any reason.
No one's entitled to a student visa. The press covers student visas like there's some sort of birthright. No, a student visa is like me inviting you into my home. If you come into my home and put all kinds of crap on my couch, I'm going to kick you out of my house.
Doug Reardon, Atlanta News First.
So one of the important milestones of any presidential administration is that administration's first 100 days. It's sort of a symbolic milestone that we have been using now for decades to sort of size up the first few months of a new president's term in office. Of course, this is President Trump's second term in office, not consecutively. And so we have been taking a look at his first 100 days. He's been holding a number of events touting what he considers to be his major accomplishments during these first few months of his second term in office. And if we take a look at how some of these policies have affected Georgians, it's very interesting, some of the opinions that come across. There is some Georgia-specific polling that suggests that 43% of voters here in the state of Georgia have a favorable opinion of the new Trump administration. And of course, that is overall, when you take a look at numbers that involve just Republican voters, of course, his support is much higher. But there is a lot of pushback and resistance to some of the policies that the president has put in place. He has made a lot of promises, of course. He did during the campaign to Georgia voters. And so political reporter Doug Reardon has the latest now on how voters are feeling here in Georgia about President Trump's second term.
Donald Trump's first 100 days in office have been a whirlwind for Georgians. He signed the Laken Riley Act, named for the young Georgian nursing student killed by an undocumented immigrant. He also cracked down on immigration, a campaign promise he made while getting record-high support from the Latino community in the election.
So far, I'm very happy with it.
Camille Solberg, a Johns Creek activist in the Hispanic community, voted for Trump and said she's happy with his first few months.
In general, I feel the Hispanic community is happy with what they're seeing. Now, there is that question mark with the immigration aspect, but we'll see what happens.
Solberg likes Trump's economic policy and says it's been especially good for Latino small business owners, but not every business owner is as happy.
I am absolutely caught in the riptide.
Angela Hawkins owns Bamboo, a bamboo fabric, bedsheet, and clothing company that sources its materials mainly from China. With Trump implementing a 134% tariff on Chinese goods, business owners like Hawkins have been faced with a tough reality early in Trump's term.
So I have to decide, is this time for me to take my bat and go home?
Through his Department of Government Efficiency, Trump cut hundreds of federal workers from the government payroll.
Just out of the blue, they just said, this group, out of there. And that's it.
The CDC in Atlanta suffered some of the biggest cuts, losing almost 18% of their workforce. Some employees, like fired public health official Ann, are still worried about the repercussions of speaking up.
It's shock, it's anger, it's sadness.
She wants Trump to be more thoughtful in his next 100 days about the impacts of his decisions.
I would say just take a minute and look at what we're doing and why.
Of course, we'll continue to follow that, as we will all the political stories here in Georgia and around the country. For Tim Darnell, I'm Rick Folbaum. Thanks so much for joining us for a political update this week. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you for watching ANF Plus. For more breaking news, live coverage, and your community stories, download the Atlanta News First app. You can also watch us on YouTube, Roku, Apple TV, and Fire TV. To join the conversation on YouTube Live, visit our channel and hit subscribe. You can also listen to the Atlanta News First podcast by searching Atlanta News First on your preferred listening platform.